In January of this year, I made a goal to eliminate my stash by the end of 2022. It has been 6 months, so it's time to check in. I've got numbers, lessons learned, and more in this video, so let's get started. Hey everyone, it's Natalie, also known as Knitty Natty. Welcome to a special 6-month stash update. Like I just said, I have decided to eliminate my stash in 2022. That means get rid of it completely, have no yarn in stash. At least that was my goal in January of this year. It is now June. I don't know the exact date today. I think it's the 22nd, but it's almost the end of June. So it has been 6 months since I made that goal. And when I made the goal, I decided I would check in at 6 months and see where I was at. Like, I'm halfway here. Let's see, how many skeins do I still have left in my stash? Is eliminating my stash a realistic goal? Do I actually want to do that? So I've got lots of stuff to share with you today. I'm really excited. It's been a fun journey. I've been documenting this every single month in my podcast. So at the end of each month, I will have a little segment in the podcast where I talk about, okay, this is how many skeins of yarn I used in projects this month, or gave away, or purchased, and kind of a plus minus for my stash. So I'm going to go through all of those numbers for the first 6 months of the year. But I wanted to start kind of with the journey itself and how this began. So I do have my computer in front of me because I wanted to take lots of good notes and everything, and I will have lots of links for you in the description box if you are new here to my channel and this is the first stash video you're seeing. I don't want you to think that I just like always have had a minimized stash, or this has always been my goal. It's totally been a journey, and I have been taking everyone along with me as I've been going through it. So with that being said, I want to kind of start at the beginning. I have been knitting and crocheting for many years. I think I'm at 17 years for knitting and 15 for crochet. And we're not going to go back that far, but essentially since that time, I have been buying and collecting yarn, using yarn, keeping some of my stash, deciding to get rid of it, deciding to use it, and just, you know, honing my taste, changing my taste. Yarn and things that we make, they change with time, and there's like trends, and my interests have changed as I've gotten older. So there's just so much going on. And like I said, we're not going to go that far back. But I think this stage of kind of eliminating stash really started in 2019. I'm going to have so many different videos for you because I started my YouTube channel at the end of 2018. So the part of this that has been recorded and documented in video form kind of really starts in 2019. So in 2019, in November of 2019 is when I first really got my yarn room. I had a space in our house that was my own. I got an IKEA shelf. I was so excited to get that IKEA shelf. And I had my first like yarn room tour. It's a 2-part tour that kind of shows how I organize everything. And at that time, I wasn't intentionally getting rid of yarn. Maybe I did a little bit of pruning items as I organized things, but it wasn't my goal to actually get rid of things. I was still in the stage of like collecting things, buying things, figuring out what I liked. This was kind of a newer time of life for me where I had like more disposable income. And so I was very excited to get to spend that on yarn and buy all sorts of things and try all sorts of things. But there's a point in that video where I actually say, like, I think I'm getting the feeling that I want to start getting rid of some stuff. And this also kind of went along with like a personal journey that I was having with minimalism. It was something that was like really new and exciting for me. And with a lot of items in our house, my husband Kent and I were actually starting to get rid of excess items. And so I think that kind of trickled into my yarn, my hobby as well. I wanted to have less so that I could do more and like be with it deeper and like not just have extra for the sake of extra. I'm going to talk more about like stash and the stash philosophy and everything in a later segment, but I think that there is no right or wrong way to have a stash. This is just kind of my personal development and stage that I am at, or was at then and am at now. So don't feel like I'm telling you like eliminating stash is the only way to go. I don't think that at all. But this is just kind of where my journey went. Okay. So that was in 2019, end of 2019. So the first really like big purge that I did was in January of 2020. So January of 2020, I did like my first big declutter. I got all of my yarn out. Like I think I threw it on the floor and I like really sorted through things like, what do I want to keep? What do I want to get rid of? What do I think I'm going to use? What do I think I'm not going to use? And did a huge big declutter. So that is going to be linked down below. Then in July of 2020, I did a second declutter, which was not super intentional that it was like 6 months apart, but I think that that's when I kind of started doing like an every 6 months sort of looking at my yarn, tools, and stash kind of a thing. Then in February of 2021, I did a massive declutter because we were moving from a 3-bedroom townhome in Texas to a 1-bedroom apartment in New York City, which is where I am now. So I knew not only did I need to kind of cut back on a lot of the yarn, that doesn't take up that much space. It's all the other stuff like the tools and the leftovers and everything. So I did a huge purge then in February of 2020, again, about 6 months after the previous one, and filmed a video on that as well. The next thing that I did was in May of 2021. We moved in April and I finally got a new IKEA shelf, half the size of the previous one in Texas, and got that all organized and set up nicely. Not all of my stuff fit on the IKEA shelf, and it still doesn't. I still have some things in my closet, but not as much as I used to. But I got all that set up and felt really, really good about how that was looking. So the next part is kind of when the stage that we are in now, which is eliminating stash in 2022. So the next video I did was in January of 2022 when I decided I want to eliminate my stash this year. And I did a big video on that. I'll have that linked down below. If you haven't seen it yet, I would definitely go watch that first and then come back and watch this one so you can really see the progression. There's actually one in between now and then. So I did the January one where I did another pretty big declutter and made that plan. So you can really see the thought process there. And then in May of 2022 is my most recent declutter. It was not a big one. Like I didn't pull everything out of my stash, but I have a lot of tips in that one. I'm going to be referring to that one a lot because that's when I really got more like, I kind of realized like what my process was and how I decide to keep or get rid of or give away things. And so I have a lot of tips in that video in May of 2022. So basically since January of 2020, about every 6 months, I have been looking at my yarn, my tools, my projects, all kinds of things, and doing a big kind of refresh with them. Pull everything out, look at what I have, look at what has been kept and not used over and over. Look at what I've been buying, what I'm interested in and using the most, and using that to make really informed decisions on what to keep and what to get rid of. This has also helped me a lot with what to purchase or buy. I haven't done an extreme, like I'm not gonna buy anything, but I did make that choice to focus on eliminating my stash this year. So I think that will bring us into kind of a stash philosophy piece that I want to share about. So let's go into that next. Stash is a deeply personal thing, and there is no right or wrong way to stash or not stash. Let me just make that really clear. I don't think that you should not have a stash. I don't think that it's bad to have a big stash. I don't think it matters if you have only blue yarns in your stash. Like, literally, your stash is personal to you, and however you want to stash can be a reflection of your own knitting and crochet journey and process. What I want to help people with is if you're looking at your stash and it overwhelms you, or you're looking at your stash and it's just disorganized and you want to get it to a place where it actually serves you to help you pick out projects or make designs or whatever it is your goal is. Oh, excuse me. I just want to share my journey so that I can kind of break some of those barriers on like what a stash is, and just that it can be anything that you want it to be. So I was kind of thinking through like, what are some reasons that someone might want to keep a stash of yarn? Just talking about yarn here, but of course this includes like so many things: tools, needles, hooks, notions, and everything that goes along with it. We know that knitting and crochet is not an isolated hobby. You need more than just yarn in order to do it. So all of these things can be included. But if you're a newer knitter or crocheter, you may not have a stash yet, and that's okay. You may want to keep it that way. You may want to keep it that way after listening to this journey, or you may say, well, no, that's a little bit much. I think I want to keep some yarn. But why might you want to have a stash? So I just kind of thought of some things. So one thing that may be really helpful to keep a stash is if you don't live close to a yarn store. I know a lot of people that maybe travel to these different yarn festivals, or that when they are traveling, they are close to a yarn store and they don't have one close at home. So that may be a good reason to buy up more yarn than you can currently work through, which is essentially what a stash is. It's any yarn that is in your intact and not in use. At least that's how I define it. So you may want to kind of build up a collection so that when you're at home and you don't have access to yarn stores, you have a lot to choose from. Another reason why you might want to keep a stash is because you love to collect special yarns or special colorways, or you love to collect things when you travel. That's perfectly okay. I think that's a really fun and amazing hobby, and collecting and buying yarn doesn't always have to translate to working with it. It doesn't mean that you have to work with it right away. That is more than okay. Another reason you may want to have a stash is because having that yarn selection there inspires you to make projects or to design. So sometimes just having it visually somewhere is so inspiring and important for a maker of any level, anyone who designs, anyone who just loves to make. It doesn't matter what level you're at. And I think it's so important to have an organized and beautiful looking stash. Beautiful just meaning like it's pleasing to the eye to look at. It may be on display, or it may be like just arranged really nicely in a tub that you need to keep tucked away because you have kids or pets, or you live, have a shared living space and you can't keep your yarn out on display in the living room when you have a roommate or live with your parents or something like that. It doesn't have to be a specific way that it looks, as long as it works for you. And when you are able to pull it out or look at your stash, you feel inspired and excited by it. Another reason you may want to have a stash is because money ebbs and flows. You may not always be able to purchase yarn. So when an influx of money comes in, or when things are going really well, it can be really nice to set ourselves up for the future when maybe we're going to be not able to work, or money is not coming in, or we just, need to spend money on things that are more important than yarn. So it's really nice to kind of have some stash so that you can have sort of a safe space where you can still be making, because as we know, making can be so calming and steady and therapeutic in a way that helps us through difficult times. Another reason you may have stash is because you don't like to waste anything. You have like the tiniest little scraps left and you want to use them all up. You may be collecting them for a larger project. You may be like holding on to them because you don't know what to do with them, but you're like, I paid good money for this, I don't want to get rid of it yet. And that is all totally fine. And then the last reason for a stash is you just like buying yarn. That is okay. If you like buying yarn and you can do it, that is more than enough reason to keep a stash. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for doing so. They may just be jealous if you're able to do that. So there's nothing wrong with the way that you stash or the way that anyone stashes yarn. So again, just keep that in mind. Like the way that I'm doing things is I'm not saying like everyone needs to do this way. I'm not even saying that future me will keep stash this way. I may decide next year that I feel really proud of myself for getting rid of all my yarn and I'm gonna go buy all new yarn. Like, I don't know, like I never know exactly what is going to make me feel inspired and good at the time. And so I just kind of work with it. And this year it's about getting things down to a little amount. So reasons that I don't want to keep a stash, and these are just reasons for me. They may resonate with you, but again, if you don't feel this way, it's more than okay. And I hope that you can still get something from this video, or at least like you can like poke your partner and say like, Natalie said that it's fine just to buy yarn. You don't have to use it. You can show them this video that it is indeed okay. Okay, so reasons why I don't want to keep a stash. So currently the stage that I'm in is just in kind of a let it go mentality. I'm still very much into minimalism in both my yarn and in my life in general. I'm like wanting to get rid of things because I find that when I don't have an excess, I actually use and appreciate what I do have a whole lot more. So it's kind of that thing of when there's like clutter everywhere, it's like it doesn't feel good to me. It feels chaotic to me, and it feels like I can't make any choices. And so sometimes just having fewer choices makes me appreciate what I have even more and actually just be able to make the choice easier. Well, I have these like 3 sweater project yarns already lined up. I really do like all of them, and this is the one I want to make next. And so it just makes things a whole lot easier. The other reason that this is a prediction. I am thinking that if I don't have a stash, I will have more freedom in my making. So there is a sense for me, a little bit of a sense of guilt when I have yarns in my stash that I'm not using and then go to buy more projects. And honestly, this is like a personal problem because there really shouldn't be like guilt really, because again, buying yarn is fine if you can buy yarn. Like if you pick out a project and then you see the perfect yarn for it and you can get that for yourself, you should do that. It's okay. So I think there's like, that's something that I need to like kind of work on in a sense, but I just feel like if I don't have so much yarn at home, I have a little more freedom to go, okay, you know, this new shawl is coming out. I know that the Stephen West Mystery Shawl Knit Along is going to be coming up in October. So like, okay, this new shawl pattern is coming out. And I have this vision for like these colors and like this for it to look like. And because I don't have anything at home, I can go pick out exactly what I am interested in right now, exactly what I feel like I need, what I'm motivated to work on. And so I feel no guilt in order to do that. Again, the guilt is like a part that is something I need to work on, but it's just like, it will feel more freeing to like just not have that as a base. The other thing I noticed is that my taste is changing a lot. And so what happens is I will buy something that I'm really excited about at the time. And because I have so many projects on the go or so many other yarns I feel like I need to work with, that yarn that I just bought goes in the stash. It sits for 6 to 12 months. And then I'm like, you know what? I don't really feel like working with that anymore. Like I'm not interested in that anymore. And so my other philosophy, this is something that I will only be able to test once I don't have a stash, is that if I have nothing like sitting here at home, when I buy something, I will work on it more immediately. And because I'm buying and then working on it immediately, it will be something that I am interested in throughout the duration of the project. And so that way I won't have things just sitting and then losing my interest. I just have this curiosity of like, will this be how I'm thinking it's going to be? Maybe if you have little to no stash, you can share with me, like, if that's the case for you, where you like just, you see something and you get inspired by it and you work on it, or if you have no stash and you're like, actually, I don't like it because of these reasons. This is just an experiment. I know that if I don't like not having a stash, I could potentially, hopefully be able to like rebuild it again. So I'm just kind of like experimenting this year. And so far I've learned a lot from it, which I'm going to share in a little bit. But let's get actually into the numbers and see how things have gone these first 6 months. I wanted to move over here in front of my stash, and if you want to see the whole journey of how things got here, all the videos are down below in order since November of 2019 to the very last thing that I did in May of 2022 and got to this stage. So let's go through the numbers of the last 6 months. I've been doing monthly updates on my podcast at the end of every single month, and I've consolidated them all here so it'll be quick and easy to see how things got to this stage. But first I want to talk about like what stash is to me, how I've been defining stash, and how I've been keeping up with it month over month, because I wanted it to be really easy for me to do and not a pain to do. So my definition of stash is any skein of yarn that is intact, so a full ball or a full skein, and is not currently in use. So as soon as I take something and wind it up and start a project, it is considered out of stash. So even if I don't use up, or even if I like, once I start the project, it's out of stash. But once I'm done with the project, even if there's yarn left over, I'm not counting the leftover yarn as going back into stash. Some of the leftover yarn I have been keeping and it's going into my like leftovers piles, but it is not considered stash for me. Some of it I have been sending off to friends or giving away in various ways. So basically, this is the stash. Anything that's right here is stash. And then once it comes off and gets wound up, it is no longer stash, and I'm counting that as out of stash. The only exception is when I did the first video in January of eliminating my stash, I had a few different projects where I had frogged the yarn. So it was like still full skeins, but it was frogged. But I have since worked projects with both of those things. So those are no longer in stash anyway. And at the beginning of the year, I had calculated that in order to use up all my stash, I would need to use approximately 4.5 skeins per month. So let's see how I did. Okay, so starting in, I've got my notes here, starting in January through the end of June, I've got numbers for every single month. I haven't shared June yet, so that will be, you're the first to hear it here. Okay, so in January, when I very first started this, I started with a stash of 50 skeins, 50 skeins. I used up 1 skein for a hat, and so I ended January with 49 skeins, or a net of -1 for January. January, I was really focused on just getting things to the right place, finishing up some whips, and so it wasn't a huge month for actually using stash. In February, I used up 3 skeins of yarn for a cowl and 1 skein for a hat. So I used 4 skeins from stash in total. I didn't add anything to stash, so I ended up with 45 skeins, or a net of -4 for February. So that was really good. In March, I used up 9 total skeins, 4 for a sweater, 1 in socks, 2 for a hat, one for a cowl, and one for a shawl. So I ended March with 36 skeins, or a net of -9 for March. And just again, because I used these skeins, it didn't mean that I finished all of those projects in March. I definitely didn't. I just either started them and they came out of stash. All right, April is where it really starts to get interesting, because that was the first 3 months of the year. And as you can see so far, everything is going down. Maybe not quite as fast as I needed to, but I wasn't adding anything to stash. But April is where it gets a little interesting, because I did add to stash. I never made it part of my plan to not add to stash. I just have an end goal of eliminating my stash, which I know sounds kind of confusing, because like I'm still planning to eliminate everything, but that doesn't mean I can't add to it. And I'll talk about more about that later on. Okay, so here's April. In April, I used up 2 skeins for a hat. Then I added 15 skeins because I went on the New Jersey yarn crawl and it was so much fun and I have 0 regrets. So I ended April with 49 skeins, which is where I was in January, at the end of January, and I was plus 13 for April. In May, I used up 14 skeins in projects, 6 in a sweater, 5 in a tee, 2 in a shawl, and 1 for socks. I also destashed 13 skeins. Yeah. So I then added 9 skeins because I went to the Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival. Again, no regrets. And I ended May with 31 skeins, or a net of -18. So just because you're adding doesn't mean you can't also go back into the negative. All right, now we are in June. So this is brand new numbers. I haven't shared this yet, and I won't actually be sharing it on the podcast because, well, maybe I will in the next podcast, but this is brand new information that hasn't been shared yet. So in June, I have used up 6 skeins out of stash and projects, 2 in a cowl, 3 in shorts, and 1 for socks. I also added 5 skeins for sock week, and 2 were a gift. So I am ending June with 30 skeins, or -1 for June. Okay, so let's review all of that in total. At the beginning of January, I had 50 skeins, 50 skeins in my stash. There's been lots of ebb and flow, adding and taking away since then, and I am ending after 6 months with 30 skeins of yarn. So a total of -20 skeins. Now, I've just started keeping track of this over the last 2 months in a notebook, which has made it much, much easier. So I just wanted to share that really quickly. I've just been doing this each month. So basically, I put an in and an out, and then I put my end of the previous month. So end of May here was 31 skeins. This is my June one. And I write down like what has come in and then what has gone out. So whether it's a destash or I've used it for a project, this month it's been all projects. Because anything I destashed, I already pulled out from last month. And then I've got a few skeins in for different things as well. So I've only done that for May and June, but I'm gonna continue doing that the rest of the year. It just makes it so much easier to keep track of everything. There are definitely, like, if you go back and listen to the podcast, there's one month where I like lose a skein somewhere. So I did adjust the numbers to make it like make sense. It was just 1 skein. I still can't figure out what exactly happened to it, but like I did the math on how many I'd added and used up, and then I counted my stash and I was like 1 off. So I don't know, I fixed it in there. I just added 1 in. So I'm feeling pretty decent about that progress for the whole 6 months. Because when you kind of look at it month over month, it can be kind of like, oh man, I didn't make a lot of progress. I only used up 1 skein. Or, oh my gosh, I added 15 skeins. But then when you look at it over the whole period of time, going from 50 to 30 skeins is a big achievement, and I feel really, really good about that. So let's talk about what's going to be happening for 6 months going forward. So do I still plan to eliminate my stash this year? The answer is yes. I am still planning to eliminate my stash, which means get rid of as much yarn as I can to zero if I can do it. I have learned so many things though in these first 6 months, so many lessons that I am reflecting on and learning about myself, and I want to share those with you as well. I had this mid-year goal of getting all of my yarn into one cube on my IKEA shelf, and while I feel like that's kind of like not a great goal, because like you would think that you would take basically the yarn you have, divide it in half, and try to get down to half of it, right? So I had 50 skeins, then my mid-year goal would be 25 skeins, or maybe even a little more, because it can be sometimes harder at the end of your goal to like push as hard. But I think because I've been keeping this pace and not allowing myself to do anything extreme, that I still feel confident that I can go through and still get rid of those 30 skeins that I have remaining. But yeah, my goal was just to get to one cube, because I was in 2 cubes at the beginning of the year, and I am now in 1 cube. So I feel pretty good about that. And then the other thing I thought maybe you would be wondering, like, why would you eliminate or make it a goal to eliminate your stash if you actually don't think you're going to get to zero? And I have learned a lot about this in a class I've been taking on perfectionism, and it's kind of like a mentality thing, setting a goal that may be just out of reach or like your ultimate end goal, and making that something that you're running towards. Even if you don't make it all the way there, even if I'm 80% of the way to 0 skeins in my stash, that's a whole lot further than I was going to be if I made my goal to only get rid of like half of my stash this year. So I feel like making a goal super big can be a tool to kind of help you like run harder, think differently, outside of the box, to really get to that place. So I know that I still may change my mind somewhere along the way, and I'm okay with that. Like, that's why every single month I'm looking at my stash and seeing how things are going and thinking like, is this something that's working for me? Is this goal still something that I want? And at 6 months in, it is still something that I want to do. And at 8 months in, I may have another idea of something that I want to like change about it, and that's perfectly okay. I have these times planned with myself to check in every single month and see how things are going. So there's going to be kind of some challenges coming up, because I am going to I'm going to 3 different festivals in the fall. So I'm going to be going to Vogue Knitting Live in August here in New York City. I'm going to be going to DFW Fiber Fest in September, and then I'm going to Rhinebeck in October. And those are all really big, like, shopping experiences. It doesn't have to be. I have a lot of choices. I could not buy yarn. I could get rid of some yarn in order to buy some more yarn. I could be very planned with my purchases. And those are still a few months out, so I'm not really worried about it at the moment. But I have learned that making an extreme like rule for yourself can actually be detrimental to getting towards your goal. So let's talk about that. Here's some of the lessons that I've learned. So let's just talk about that first one. Making an extreme no purchase, or like I'm going to use up 2 skeins for every 1 skein that I buy, or even a project goal. Like I'm not going to cast on anything else until I finish 2 whips. That can actually really be a trap for yourself. What happens is, if you break that rule, the self-imposed rule that nobody else told you to do, you have it for yourself. If you break that rule, then you feel like you failed. And once you feel like you failed your goal, you're like, whatever. You give up. You don't want to do it anymore. So I find that just like not having any super strict rules, like I'm not purchasing any yarn at these next few festivals. Instead, I'm like, my year-end goal is to eliminate stash. So when I'm at these festivals, I'm thinking about that. My year-end goal is to eliminate stash. So if I'm looking at a sweater's quantity of yarn, I'm thinking, do I want to make this year? And if the answer is no, then I'm like, great, I'm not going to add that to my stash this year then. Or if my answer is yes, then I'm like, okay, well, I do have 3 other sweaters quantities in my stash. I have some options. I could decide not to use those sweater quantities, give them to somebody else. I could, I don't know. I'm not going to even worry so much about the how. I just know that my end goal is to eliminate stash this year. And then every decision I make along the way, I can kind of like weigh different things to do for that. I've also been finding that there's always like more than 2 solutions. Sometimes we think like there's only 2 ways to do it. There's either do it or don't. And there's usually like at least three options in between. So I feel like a lot of times it's either use the yarn or it sits in stash. And I can also like give the yarn away. I can give the yarn to a friend. I can use part of the yarn. I can split it with a friend. I can, there's just so many different things. And sometimes it's just, we get too bogged down by how we're going to do it. And I'm just like, this is what I want to do. And I'm going to figure it out along the way. Another lesson that I've learned is that I feel so free, like so much freer and more relaxed about giving my yarn away. Things that I thought were so special and so important and I was going to use them right away when I purchased them. Over time, I've kind of found that I'm not quite as attached to them as I thought that I was. And even more than that, when somebody that I know, a friend or a follower says that they love something that I have, I'm like, actually, do you want it? Like, it actually makes me feel better to know that the yarn that for me, I love it, it's amazing, but it's just sitting here right now, could be used by somebody who's like excited about it in the moment, really wants it, and maybe the yarn's not even available anymore, and I can give that to them. I've just found so much more joy in that. And that brings me to another lesson. This one, go with me here. I want to talk about sunk cost, because as somebody who's been decluttering for like a few years, kind of aiming towards minimalism, I find that this fear or this like guilt, shame of like, I've paid good money for this, that it holds me back from like letting go of things I'm not actually using. It takes time and energy and space to keep these things, and they could be better used by somebody else, but I feel like I need to get money back for them. So let's talk about sunk cost. So sunk cost is money that has been spent and cannot be recovered. This is sort of the case when we buy yarn. It's obviously not a whole truth, because you can destash your yarn and get some money back for it by selling it. But it takes time and effort to do that. And it may not be worth it for you. And that's okay. I find that for me, not worth it. I don't want to spend time like pricing things and like feeling bad about like not getting the price that I want, like haggling with people and like all of that. I would rather just say like, this yarn, I was going to use it for this. It could be used for this, this, and this. I'm like hyping people up about it. And I'm like, it's free. As long, like if you're in the US, it's yours. If you're outside of the US, help me with shipping, and that's it, it's yours. And I've just found it so much more freeing and easier to get rid of things when I have that mentality that like, I already bought it, I already spent the money, now it's a gift. Like it's not something that I need to recoup. And I understand that this is also like coming from a point of privilege too, that I'm not having to get money back for it. But also like when you've already purchased something, like you can't, I guess that's the sunk cost philosophy, is like you can't expect to get money back for it because you've already purchased it. The money is already gone. So you can either use what you have and use it up. And sometimes that's the only choice that we do have. We need to use what we have. But if you don't have to use what you have, you shouldn't feel guilty for letting it go and not getting your money back for it and giving it to somebody else, and look for the joy in being able to do that for somebody else. It's really, can be really, it can just feel really good. Like I know that when I was like 16 years old or something, and I didn't have any extra money to like buy nice yarns, I would have loved it if somebody was like, you can have this for free. I would have been like, yes, please. I want that now. Here's my address. So yeah, just food for thought. It's, it's something that has taken me a while to get into that mentality, but it feels really good to be there, at least with these things. Working on it for other things as well. I think, is that everything? I'm just like looking at my notes here. So overall, the lesson that I've learned is this is a journey. I don't think I mentioned this in the beginning, but like, this did not just take me 6 months to get to. This has been many, many years in the making. You can see that from all of the videos that I've recorded. And then there's so much that happened even before that. So if you're frustrated with yourself or you're frustrated with your stash, make some peace with it and know that it is okay that it's taking time. Sometimes I found the best thing to do is to like take everything that you love and put it on display, and take the other things and like put it somewhere else. Put it in the closet, like just get it out of sight, out of mind. And then you can slowly go back through and say, okay, now I'm mentally ready to like handle these things. How do I want to use them, donate them, or sell them, or give them away? And you can just slowly do that over time. And it's okay for it to take that time. I found that checking in every single month with myself, having that little, I left my notebook over by my stash, but having that page in my notebook where like every time I start a new project, I just write in how many skeins. Anytime I get more yarn, I write in how many skeins are in, and I just keep track of that monthly. That's been very helpful. And then every 6 months to have a time, just pop a reminder in your calendar, remind me every 6 months to go through my stash, and I just take a look at things. I don't have to do a full stash, like pull everything out, but just take a look, like do a little fluff, pull everything out, organize the colors, put the skeins that are messy in the back, like see what you have, see what you're kind of like not as excited about anymore, but you're really excited about to work on. And just having that in the calendar every 6 months really helps me to feel like I am using what I have, using and going through things and letting go of things that I'm not wanting to use, and just having that process already decided so that I can just do it. So the next 6 months, I have 30 skeins left in my stash. So quick math tells me that if I divide 30 skeins by 6, because I have 6 months, I will need to work through 5 skeins per month from stash. Now, looking at what I've already done this year, I'm not super certain that that is a realistic thing to ask for myself, to actually knit and use up 5 skeins per month. Could I just go take everything out of stash right now and cast on a project and it be out of stash? Yes, but I'm also really working on my whips and keeping them at a manageable number that works for me, so I'm not going to do that. I do have plans for almost every single skein in my stash currently, but I'm also seeing some now that have been there since January that I'm like not super excited about anymore. So I'm thinking about using those for a giveaway in the future, and that will be a really great way to help me still work towards my goal of eliminating stash while still getting to use things that I love and then buy things that I see that I'm excited about at the moment. So I just am like, I don't know, feeling kind of good today. I'm feeling like I am ready for this next chapter. I've been thinking about next year already, and I know I'm only halfway through, or we're only halfway through this year, but if I'm able to get to, or when I'm able to get to this goal of like eliminating my stash, I think what's up next is to start working on my leftovers. I have so many yarns, scraps, and things left over because I do get rid of really tiny things. You've seen me toss those, but I do keep things that are like a larger amount of yarn, and I want to use those up too and have them always going in projects so that I don't just have things left behind. What's something I do see for my future is like, this is just like the dream. Like, okay, here's what happens. Go with me here. New sweater pattern comes out. Love it. Go to the yarn store or shop online, get exactly the yarn and colors that I like. Perfect. Make the sweater. Then I have leftovers. I go, well, I don't have anything in my stash right now. Do I want to keep working with this yarn? Do I want to give this yarn away? Do I want to put it in a scrap project? and I use it all up, and then I start a new project. Sounds pretty magical. I'm sure there are people that work this way, and I am impressed by you, but I want to be that way in the future, or at least I think I do now, and I'm gonna try it and see how I like it. So that's my plan for the next few months and potentially for the next year, but I'll definitely do another update at the end of the year. If you're feeling super inspired to organize your stash now, I would suggest watching, if you haven't already, my quick yarn organization from May. That's the most recent video I did on my stash before this. There's lots of practical tips in there and my whole kind of 3-step, I think actually it's 4 steps, 4-step process for how I look at different categories of my stash and work through them and decide what to keep first, my favorites, and what to get rid of. It's kind of a KonMari home edit / my own process. And so I feel like that will be a really great place to start. Plus, all of the other videos for my entire journey from 2019 on are going to be linked in chronological order down below if you want to go watch through all of them and see Natalie from 3 years ago versus myself now and how everything is looking with stash. So I'm going to continue doing monthly updates at the end of the month in my podcast, and in between, if you want to follow along with what I'm making, what I'm getting rid of, and my whole journey, you can follow me on Instagram at Knitty Natty. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!